I call the Committee on Small Business and Entrepreneurship to order. We've all heard Washington, D.C. referred to as the swamp, but these days it is looking more and more like a pigsty. While Iowa small businesses keep their books neat and tidy and pinch pennies to balance their own budgets, they are the ones who are hurt when the government is sloppy and reckless with hard-earned taxpayer dollars. That's why I made a promise to Iowans to make Washington squeal. For over a decade, I've been exposing egregious Washington waste with my monthly Squeal Awards. Some examples are too outrageous to believe. I'm talking about bureaucrats approving PPP loans for applicants who used pictures of dolls for IDs. Imagine giving Barbie or Ken a taxpayer-funded loan. Not only that, but they also believed folks claiming to be over 115 years old were alive and well enough to be approved for 3,095 PPP and EIDL loans worth $333 million, including $36,000 to a 157-year-old. That's pure hogwash. But this is only the tip of the iceberg. Instead of boosting Main Street, millions of your tax dollars were wasted through USAID to fund Iraqi Sesame Street. And this one is unacceptable. Improper payments or the government tossing cash into the wrong trough have become commonplace. In fiscal year 2024, federal agencies shoveled out $162 billion in improper payments. The most frustrating part is how simple it is to stop this waste. A report by the Pandemic Response Accountability Committee found that $79 billion in potential COVID fraud could have been prevented if 4 basic questions were asked. 1, is the applicant's Social Security number valid? 2, if valid, does the name connected to that number match the name on the application? 3, does the birthday match? And lastly, is the individual alive? Seriously, folks, that could have saved $79 billion right there. The good news is that we can prevent nearly all improper payments in the future with my DOGE in Spending Act that enacts common sense guardrails like those 4 simple questions. And these quick fixes could not come soon enough. 6 years after COVID, scammers are still pigging out on SBA relief funds. I'm proud this committee advanced my SBA Fraud Enforcement Act, and I'm eager to see it become law. Fraudsters snout deep in pandemic-era shuttered venue and restaurant funds must be held accountable. Unfortunately, unless my bill is passed by the Senate and signed into law, many of these criminals will soon get away with it. During the prior administration, USAID repeatedly rebuffed my requests for information using intimidation and shell games to hide where money is going, how it's being spent, and why. This is the same agency that handed cash to violent terrorists and funded dance classes in Wuhan. Yes, the same Wuhan you are thinking of. As a result of my oversight, I discovered firsthand USAID was a rogue bureaucracy operating with little accountability and, at times, at odds with our nation's best interests. My findings were confirmed when, this summer, federal prosecutors convicted a USAID contracting officer who raked in over $1 million in bribes to steer more than $550 million in contracts to 8A program participants. Unfortunately, the SBA's 8A program has been a magnet for fraudsters since its inception. Decades of government watchdog investigations, bipartisan oversight hearings, a patchwork of reforms, and what is there to show for it? Not a shred of evidence that the program is worth taxpayers' investment. It is refreshing to see an administration take fraud as seriously as I do, and I applaud Administrator Loeffler's efforts to end 8A program scams for good. In the meantime, I've launched my own 8A investigation and introduced the Stop 8A Contracting Fraud Act to pause 8A no-bid contracts government-wide until the SBA completes its audit. I am also urging federal agencies government-wide to adopt this common-sense moratorium. Make no mistake, this waste hurts all our small businesses the most. When COVID fraudsters cashed in, thousands of deserving small businesses in Iowa were left out in the cold because funds had run dry. When the Biden USAID sent money to every corner of the world, small businesses here at home footed the bill as their taxes skyrocketed. When 8A programs divert government contracts to businesses committing fraud, legitimate small businesses pay the price, losing jobs, revenue, and growth opportunities. Government contracting should be based on eligibility and merit, not skin color. I promise to make Washington squeal, and it is clear that this pig pen of a swamp needs a thorough mucking out. I want to thank our witnesses for bravely pulling on their rubber boots and grabbing their buckets. Thank you all very much. Let's clean this up for American taxpayers and put our hardworking small businesses first. And I do look forward to hearing your testimony. I now ask unanimous consent that a statement by Senator Dan Sullivan of Alaska be entered into the record. Senator Sullivan has been a fierce advocate for Alaskans and a partner in working to ensure fraud is eradicated from federal contracting. And without objection, so ordered. I now recognize Ranking Member Markey for his opening statement.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. Today's hearing is called Running Government Like a Small Business. Cut waste, crush fraud. Sounds important. A more accurate title, however, would be Running Government Like a Trump Family Business. Cutting deals with billionaires and crushing small businesses. That's what the title on this hearing should say. Because this administration, the Trump administration, it's chosen to focus their energy on relentlessly attacking small businesses, from tariffs to health care to electricity prices to contracts. Yeah, they're focused on small businesses, crushing Main Street. Through the now defunct Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE, the administration disproportionately cut contracts for women-owned and minority-owned small businesses. Those are the programs they cut. Additionally, 10% of all contracts cut by DOGE were veteran-owned businesses, most of whom were veterans disabled in the line of service. Can you imagine? They cut 10% of those contracts for those vets. This is all since January. Well, we all want taxpayer dollars to be well spent. We should take note of who this administration treats as expendable. It's those least able to defend themselves. It's those least able to flatter or provide gifts to the president and to his family. The administration's most recent fixation, SBA's 8A program, which is a program that gives small, disadvantaged businesses training, technical assistance, and federal contracting opportunities for 9 years. Now, those businesses are principally Black and Brown owned in our country. That's who they're focusing on. Cutting that program for those people who are just the small businesses trying to get a foothold in this American economy during this very difficult economic time with healthcare costs and with electricity costs and with the tariffs, all zeroing in on small businesses. This program was actually signed into law by a Republican president, President Nixon, in 1978. It has done a world of good for tens of thousands of small businesses, and again, disproportionately Black and brown, providing access to billions in contracting opportunities with the largest buyer of goods and services in the country, the federal government. Like any federal program, there have been rare cases of bad actors taking advantage of these resources, and they should be held accountable. they should be made to pay the price. But these rare instances do not warrant an all-out assault on a program that has created good-paying jobs, provided pathways to success for small businesses, and created economic growth for our country. In a hearing focused on waste and fraud and abuse, we just cannot avoid or ignore the elephant in the room: President Trump's pay-to-play system. To receive special status as a foreign country, you must gift the president a $400 million jetliner that he gets to keep when he leaves the White House. That's unbelievable. To get a gold mine of government contracts, just pay for the president's golden ballroom. To receive an exemption from President Trump's terrible tariffs, simply give the president a lavish gift or pay to dine at Mar-a-Lago. Can a small business do that? No, they're not dining at Mar-a-Lago. They can't afford it. You got to put up $1 million to just get in the door. This is not how honest, hardworking small businesses get things done. This is how they get business done in The Godfather, Godfather Part 1. That's what this White House is all about. Because when it comes to true oversight, who gets thrown under the floodlights? It's the little guys, the minority small business owner, the black and brown small businesses, the veteran-owned small businesses, the local restaurant trying to make it through the pandemic. And what is it for? It's all to help the big guys who hobnob with the president and don't want pesky small businesses competing with them for customers or contracts. Those big guys say, crush the little guys. And by the way, give us all their money and tax breaks for us too. If we're serious about cutting waste, crushing fraud, helping small businesses, let's start at the top. The president's handouts to his billionaire buddies aren't just corruption and an abuse of power. It's theft. Theft from small businesses, theft from hardworking Americans, theft from our future. Every tariff exemption handed out to the president's political posse rigs the game against small businesses trying to survive the president's disastrous trade war. Small businesses had to take the president to the Supreme Court to try to remove those tariffs on them. My hope is that they'll rule that way, but you never know with the Supreme Court. Every dollar the Trump family gets by treating our government as their own personal piggy bank is money stolen from everyday people. President Trump and his family raked in more than $1.8 billion in cash and gifts just this year, the first 11 months. It's Robin Hood in reverse. It's Main Street versus Mar-a-Lago. That's what this hearing is all about. And it's time Congress does its job and holds this president accountable for turning the federal government into an arm of the Trump business organization. The little guys are not the villains. President Trump's corruption and waste and fraud and abuse is America's real villain, and I look forward to this hearing, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Ranking Member Markey, and I want to extend a warm welcome to all of our witnesses. I'm thankful that you took time out of your busy schedules to share your expertise and insight with this committee. I will now introduce our first witness, Mr. Luke Rosiak. Mr. Rosiak is an investigative reporter at the Daily Wire who has covered waste in the federal government for nearly 20 years. He is the winner of the prestigious 2025 Dow Prize for Best Reporting on Government Waste and the 2022 Media Research Center Bulldog Award for Outstanding investigative journalism. Congratulations on your recent Dow Award, and it is well-deserved. Next, Mr. John Hart is the CEO of Open the Books. Before joining Open the Books, he served as the communications director to late U.S. Senator Tom Coburn, where he helped pass landmark transparency legislation that put federal spending online. His work at Open the Books includes oversight reports on improper payments, government waste, and COVID fraud. Our third witness, Dr. Courtney LaFountain, is the Acting Director of Financial Markets and Community Investment at the Government Accountability Office, GAO, in Washington, D.C. Dr. LaFountain earned her PhD in economics from Washington University in St. Louis, Missouri. She is a recipient of the 2022 Arthur S. Fleming Award, which recognizes federal employees for outstanding public service. Thank you again, and I now recognize Ranking Member Markey to introduce his witness.
Yep, thank you, Madam Chair. Dylan Hetler Gaudet is the Acting Vice President of Government Affairs at the Project on Government Oversight, or POGO. POGO began in 1981 as a Pentagon watchdog. In the years since, they have expanded to focus on the entire federal government, fighting to achieve a more ethical, effective, and accountable federal government. Mr. Hetler Gaudet has covered a range of issues, including congressional stock trading, Pentagon accountability, federal spending issues, foreign influence, and the Foreign Agents Registration Act, judicial ethics, and congressional capacity, amongst others. POGO is one of my all-time favorites, and it's so great to have you here today. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Ranking Member Markey. And briefly, I'll take a moment to explain our lighting system to our witnesses. And Mr. Hetler Gaudet, you just talk away. Okay, so we'll let you know if time is expiring. There are 3 lights in front of you. Green means go, yellow means you are running out of time, and red means wrap up your remarks. I ask unanimous consent that the witnesses' full statements be included in the record. Without objection, so ordered. As your written testimony has been made part of the record, the committee asks that you limit your oral remarks to 5 minutes. And with that, Mr. Rosiak, we'll start with you, and you are recognized for 5 minutes for your testimony.
Thank you, Senator Ernst, Senator Markey, committee members. It's an honor to appear before all of you. I've been an investigative reporter for nearly 20 years, focused on waste, fraud, and abuse in the federal government. I concluded many years ago that the most openly abused and shockingly corrupt program in the federal government is so-called set-aside contracting. Contracts are set aside from open competition for women and minority-owned businesses and other groups. The Small Business Administration coordinates so-called 8A contracting for agencies across the government. That gives this committee an important jurisdictional vantage point for a big pool of money at places like the Pentagon. Now, if you were doing something in your yard, like taking down a tree or doing some other work on your property, you probably wouldn't do that work unless you called around and got, say, 3 quotes from different vendors. You choose the one with the best value. The government will build a tank without even trying to find the best value first through this mechanism that we call set-aside contracting. The program was created in 1978 mostly to help Black Americans start businesses since they'd been discriminated against by the government. But I don't believe any member of this committee would support the program if you see how it works a half-century later. At least 5% of all federal contracting dollars are diverted through set-asides. But these billions don't go to poor minorities in your states. They go to insiders in the suburbs of D.C., which are already the wealthiest counties in the country. Very little goes to Black Americans these days. The racial composition of America is more complex than it was back in 1978. In the case of first-generation immigrants, this results in an odd policy that the government is basically prioritizing foreigners over Americans. By one measure, South Asians, from people from the country of India, gobble up a lion's share of 8A contracts, while Black Americans get only 15%. Not 50%, but 15%. The scandal isn't that there have been a few examples of abuse. The scandal is that it's hard to find one that isn't. Pick a random set-aside contract on usaspending.gov. I quickly chose OCT Consulting, LLC, when preparing this testimony. So this isn't a notorious fraudster that's been in the news. I haven't written about this person. I literally just picked them off a list a couple days ago. It's a guy named Atul Kathoria who lists a home in McLean, Virginia, as his company address. He received 19 contracts from the federal government, totaling $43 million, without having to show that he had the best price or the best services. The government didn't even consider anybody else. Now, normally it would be illegal to give a contract to a company with no competition. That can enable bribery and kickbacks. It's the kind of thing corrupt countries like Russia do. In this case, it was legal because the government certified OCT Consulting as a, quote, subcontinent Asian, Indian American-owned small business 8A participant. Well, perhaps the SBA forgot to check with the U.S. Census Bureau. Indian Americans are the wealthiest demographic in America, with a higher median income than whites. These contracts are in the field of IT, which didn't even exist during the era of government discrimination. Indians have never been underrepresented in the field of IT. They're actually overrepresented in that field. Now, a listing of DC's most expensive real estate transactions shows that earlier this year, a tool bought an 11,000 square foot estate, replete with a wine cellar, for $7 million. You can see it up there on the screen. Minority ownership is just to win a contract, not to fix societal disparities at any meaningful scale. Every staff member listed on OCT Consulting's website is a white man, except for the owner and his wife. What did Atul do before he became a disadvantaged businessman and overcame all odds to become a millionaire? He went to George Washington University and worked for 15 years as a financial consultant at Ernst & Young and Booz Allen Hamilton. This kind of thing is a disgrace. You've all seen the video where an exec from Native American 8A ATI Consulting was caught on camera saying they just subcontract the work out to companies like Accenture and keep a huge cut. The story here isn't that a wily businessman concealed this from the government and finally got caught. It's that 8A is actually a corrupt conspiracy between government procurement officers and big companies. The companies, the Beltway bandits, like Accenture, Booz Allen, Deloitte, Lockheed Martin. Somebody from government will be talking to a friend at one of these companies and say, I have some work that you guys might be a good fit for. Let's work together. But if Booz Allen, say, has to compete for it, they'll have to make sure they charge less than Deloitte. The process would take forever, and there's no guarantee they'll get it. So the contracting officer encourages the Beltway bandit to seek out a random 8A that's listed, waiting like a shell company, on one of the contract vehicles. The government can immediately award the contract to the 8A, knowing that they'll subcontract the work back to the big firm. It's just a way to bypass competitive bidding, a process we have in place for a reason. So the guy in the James O'Keefe video didn't swindle the government. We all knew. The government knew. There are skyscrapers down the street in Tyson's Corner, defense contractors working on advanced weapons that don't have to bid competitively for contracts because we say they're Alaskan Native corporations. Every one of us in this room knows there are not Native Alaskans in those buildings. 8A creates a random group of influence peddlers who, like lobbyists, get rich by selling their access to government insiders for the benefit of big business while driving up the costs for all of us. This is the kind of thing people hate about Washington. You owe it to voters to end this program.
Thank you for the testimony, Mr. Rosiak. And next we will go to Mr. Hetler-Gaudet. And Mr. Hetler-Gaudet, you are now recognized for 5 minutes for your testimony.
Thank you, Chair Ernst, Ranking Member Markey, and members of the committee. I appreciate the opportunity to testify before you today on the important issue of waste, fraud, and abuse in the federal government, particularly in the federal contracting process. This is a really important and persistent issue, and I'm pleased to see the Senate Small Business Committee taking it up. My name is Dylan Hetler-Gaudet, and I am the Acting Vice President of Policy and Government Affairs at the Project on Government Oversight, or POGO. We are a nonpartisan, independent watchdog group with nearly 45 years of experience promoting more accountability, transparency, and effectiveness in federal government. We literally exist to combat abuse of power and corruption, which necessarily includes trying to root out waste, fraud, abuse, and conflicts of interest. As you can imagine from the name of our organization, we believe strongly in the power and the value of oversight. This hearing today is a prime example of good oversight work. We believe strongly that good oversight work is indispensable to the pursuit of good governance. And this is why it's been so alarming to see what has been happening over the past year or so. The current administration has systematically dismantled the very foundation of the federal government that it is supposed to be leading, which has included attacking key oversight institutions. Whether it's firing inspectors general en masse, attacking oversight bodies such as the Government Accountability Office, cutting off access to key agencies for press and journalists, nominating manifestly unfit and unqualified individuals to serve in critical oversight positions, or largely relegating Congress to the sidelines. The current administration has made a mockery of the very concept of oversight and accountability in government. We also saw the hyped but largely failed effort to root out waste, fraud, and abuse under the auspices of the so-called Department of Government Efficiency. Beyond that, we've seen direct assaults on the constitutional structure of government, which has included the illegal impoundment and withholding of congressionally appropriated funds and the unlawful firing of large numbers of federal workers. We have already heard today and we'll continue to hear more about the Small Business Administration's 8A Business Development Program. We should put this program in a little bit of context at the outset here. All 8A contract dollars comprise about 5.4% of the total $755 billion that were handed out in federal contracts last year, the vast majority of which are awarded to very large, well-connected, powerful corporations. If there are people taking advantage of the 8A program or any other program in government, they should be held accountable. But we must realize that oversight bandwidth and resources are extremely finite and scarce, and we need to triage those resources and focus on the most egregious and the largest examples of waste, fraud, and abuse. We should not select oversight targets on the basis of political or ideological agendas. My primary purpose here today is not to criticize and complain and to point out bad things that have happened. I'm here to propose solutions. So I want to focus on a couple of solution areas here, but there are many more I lay out in my written testimony. First, we must protect, strengthen, and preserve the independence and the effectiveness of key watchdogs and oversight practitioners, such as inspectors general and the Government Accountability Office. We must also sufficiently resource and fund those organizations so that they can perform their critical oversight duties effectively. The Senate also has an especially pivotal role to play in providing advice and consent on the nomination of the individuals who should be leading those entities, and the Senate must never allow the confirmation of politically compromised, unfit, and unqualified individuals. We must also take a long, hard look at the ethics, rules, and the enforcement of those rules that we have on the books currently. They are wholly insufficient to the task of rooting out corruption, conflicts of interest, and cronyism, which play midwife to waste, fraud, and abuse. We must also halt the pernicious effects of the revolving door between agencies and the very industries that those agencies are supposed to oversee and regulate. We have an opportunity before us here today and in the rest of the 119th Congress to advance real, common-sense reforms to promote government integrity and crack down on waste, fraud, and abuse. Me and my organization stand ready, willing, and able to partner with anyone who wants to turn those goals into reality. Thank you for having me here today, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Hetler-Gaudet. We appreciate your testimony. And next, we will move to Mr. Hart. And Mr. Hart, you are now recognized for 5 minutes for your testimony.
Madam Chair Ernst, Ranking Member Markey, and distinguished senators, thank you for the invitation to testify today. Every dollar saved in Washington is a dream realized somewhere in America. Nowhere is that more true than in the small business community. Small businesses aren't just the engine of growth, they are also teachers. They teach us that our founders were right, that Thomas Jefferson was on to something when he said, the natural progress of things is for liberty to yield and government to gain ground. So I commend this committee for truly listening, for hearing. And we're here, of course, because government doesn't operate like a small business. Instead of doing more with less, government does less with more. Over the past 100 years, the federal government has grown massively. In 1925, it's been about $484 per person, adjusted for inflation. Today, that number is more than $20,000 per person. And in our economy, we see this law at work. The best way to make something expensive is for government to make it affordable. Sectors that have been the most lavishly subsidized, such as healthcare and education, have seen the worst inflation. On the other hand, sectors that have not been as heavily subsidized, such as electronics, tend to produce goods and services that get better and more affordable over time. It's pretty simple. TVs get thinner while government gets bigger. While government borrows to avoid hard choices, small businesses live in the real world of finite resources. Our unsustainable safety net programs are absolutely the primary drivers of our debt and deficit, in particular healthcare fraud. But government salaries are part of the problem. Between 2020 and 2024, government salaries rose 33% faster than private sector wages. Meanwhile, the number of federal employees earning more than $200,000 a year rose by 82% to bring the number to 70,000 employees. And today we have more than 400 agencies and sub-agencies in the federal government. Do small businesses really need 400 agencies to succeed? Or would they be better off with 200, 100, or maybe the 4 our founders authorized in the Constitution? Instead of expanding federal agencies, we should be expanding their agency. Meanwhile, the agency charged with helping small businesses often misses the mark. Across the country, we see SBA lending flowing to organizations that most Americans would never consider, quote, small. SBA-backed loans have gone to Fortune 500 firms, Rolex stores, Napa wineries, luxury spas, and plastic surgery centers. These aren't the mom-and-pop shops Congress intended to support. Since 2023, our auditors found more than $105 million in SBA loans for private country clubs, beach clubs, tennis and racket clubs, and yacht clubs. Nearly half of that in 2025 alone. Another $11.8 billion went to highly capitalized investment funds and venture finance firms, which was aid to Wall Street, not Main Street. And fraud and improper payments compound the problem. During the pandemic, the SBA issued paycheck protection loans to 50,000 entities on Treasury's do not pay list, a failure that modernized data systems could have prevented. Major law firms and accounting firms received $1.4 billion, despite showing little or no financial hardship. And of course, we all know age-related fraud also flourished. In 2021 and 2022, SBA issued 5,593 loans to businesses owned by people who said they were 11 years old or younger. Now, I applaud that initiative, but I think that may not be true. While 3,095 loans went to borrowers aged 115 or older. That's $645 million in questionable loans in just 2 years. And as you memorably noted, Senator Ernst, some fraudsters uploaded pictures of Barbie dolls as forms of ID to obtain loans. So I guess that makes us all kin, accessories to the fraud and waste of our own taxpayer dollars. But the good news is our system is amenable to change. 20 years ago, my late boss, Senator Tom Coburn, teamed up with a young senator from Illinois named Barack Obama to pass landmark transparency legislation that put all federal spending online for the first time. Obama said, "It is not often that two senators from different parties are able to bridge the partisan divide in this town and get something accomplished. But the American people demand greater transparency and accountability. And it is our honor and privilege, indeed, it is our duty to provide the tools to help make that possible. At Open the Books, we are continuing that work. We're encouraging real-time transparency and building next-generation AI tools. We believe the best way to thwart a surveillance state is with a surveillance citizenry." So thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Hart. And Dr. LaFountain, you are now recognized for 5 minutes for your testimony.
Thank you, Chair Ernst, Ranking Member Markey, and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to discuss GAO's work on small business administration programs. SBA's mission is to help Americans start, grow, and build small businesses. Today, I'd like to discuss opportunities we've identified for SBA to improve management of fraud risks, improper payments, and contracting programs to better meet that mission in the future. And my testimony draws on recommendations from GAO reports in these areas since the spring of 2020. So I'll begin with opportunities to better manage fraud risks and improper payments that surfaced during the pandemic. SBA moved quickly to set up programs to respond to the pandemic's economic shock, and altogether it made or guaranteed more than $1 trillion in loans and grants and assisted more than 10 million small businesses. But the speed of those loan approvals came at the expense of oversight and fraud risk management, especially early on. Our work uncovered several weaknesses, such as heavy reliance on self-certification and pay-and-chase approaches, rather than putting stronger upfront safeguards in place against fraud and other improper payments. So where SBA has acted on our recommendations, we've seen some clear improvements. It's conducted fraud risk assessments and put controls in place to prevent funding from going to potential fraudsters or ineligible applicants. And as of the end of fiscal year 2025, we estimate that improved oversight saved the government at least $30 billion. All that being said, fraud risks and improper payments didn't disappear with the end of the public health emergency. SBA's pandemic programs still involve large numbers of loans and grants being reviewed, monitored, and serviced. Because of that, SBA needs to continue strengthening its safeguards. For example, by expanding its use of data analytics for detecting fraud, strengthening post-award monitoring, and improving processes for referring potential fraud cases to its Inspector General. In addition, SBA should enhance its capacity to identify and track overpayments and subsequent recoveries. I also want to emphasize that the lessons learned about fraud risk management from SBA's pandemic programs do remain relevant for the agency's other programs. For example, the pandemic programs highlighted the importance of conducting robust fraud risk assessments. And we've reported recently on weaknesses in fraud risk assessments by agencies participating in small business research programs. And we identified steps SBA can take through its oversight role to help improve the quality of those assessments should those programs be reauthorized. Our work has also underscored the value of robust internal controls and quality data for detecting bad actors and ineligible applicants. We've reported recently on weaknesses in the data systems that SBA uses to certify its small businesses' eligibility for contracting assistance programs. And while we didn't specifically examine those systems through the lens of fraud risk management, a more secure, reliable system for validating, maintaining, and disseminating information about program eligibility would clearly help reduce risks. Finally, in June, the SBA administrator announced a review of fraud in the 8A Business Development Program following a Department of Justice investigation that you've discussed involving bribery and businesses participating in the 8A program. Applying the lessons that SBA learned about fraud risk management in its pandemic programs could be applied to support this effort as well. So, bottom line, with a more robust system of internal controls and fraud risk management, SBA would be better placed to support small businesses, both during normal times and in future emergencies, while also ensuring that taxpayer dollars go where they should. So this concludes my opening remarks, and thank you again for the opportunity to speak here today.
No, thank you everyone for the testimony, and we'll move into the question answer portion of today's hearing. And I now recognize myself for 5 minutes for questions. And Mr. Rosiak, we'll start with you. Today, the 8A program allows Washington insiders to sell government access and contract awards. What's your assessment of the program's current oversight mechanisms, and how effective have they been in preventing abuse?
So oversight hasn't worked, and it's not going to work. Set-asides are inherently extraordinarily vulnerable to corruption and fraud and waste. Wherever there's the prospect of millions of dollars going to somebody without the usual competitive process, the free market is going to find creative ways to get that money to where it would otherwise have gone, which unfortunately often means big companies. This waste is massive. If you look at, for example, the women-owned businesses in certain industries, say construction, asphalt paving, things like that, anecdotally, everybody that I talk to says the vast majority of these companies are actually owned by the husband of the woman that's the supposed owner. But realistically, how would the government ascertain who's really in control of the company? You'd almost have to, the government would practically have to be in the bedroom with them there to see who's exerting control over this business. It's not realistic. In cases of pass-throughs, the disadvantaged company is supposed to retain 51% of the proceeds. But it's virtually impossible to stop pass-throughs without having the sort of information that the government would realistically never see. There's so many ways around it. For example, if you partner with a non-disadvantaged company that's supposed to get 49% or less, you could put a lot of the expenses on the disadvantaged side, including maybe even taking some of the staff from the non-disadvantaged company and temporarily hiring them and putting them on the books of the disadvantaged company. It's trivial to hit that 51% marker. Not to mention that, in some cases, they may just keep 51% if they're too lazy to cook the books a bit. Just keep 51% as essentially, Senator Markey made a Godfather reference earlier. That's what I've heard some of these 8A, an 8A contractor himself likened himself to the mafia and said it's basically like the protection money or whatever you have to pay the mobsters. To get these contracts, the big companies kind of know they have an unspoken agreement with the procurement officers and these 8A contractors that you got to cut them in on that. And I think that's not going to change. I don't see any way around that without basically just ending the practice of set-asides.
Wow. Thank you for that response. Mr. Hart, I want to go to something that you referenced in your testimony. You mentioned that your former boss, Senator Tom Coburn, someone that many of us respected so much, he worked with then Senator Barack Obama. You know, one of these instances where we have people of different parties that are coming together to really do something good for our taxpayers. And what they did, they wrote the law creating usaspending.gov, and that's a searchable public website of government spending. My team spends a lot of time on that website. Was it their intent for other transaction agreements, or the OTAs, to be omitted from the website?
Absolutely not, Senator. That was never their intention. And as you've noted, that's a tremendous problem right now with USA Spending. Mm-hmm. And that is one of the reforms that we need to do, is immediately fix and patch that so that money cannot be hidden from taxpayers. But we have to look at why did the founders write transparency into the Constitution? It's important to note they used the word shall in Article 1, Section 9, Clause 7. Shall provide a regular accounting of receipts. They didn't say you can provide that if you feel like it, if it's convenient for you and your political opponents, and will punish your enemies. They said shall. So it's a requirement, and that language precedes the Bill of Rights and the First Amendment itself. So transparency is a foundational first principle. It's the oxygen in the public square. We can't speak if we can't breathe. So if they wrote that today, I'm convinced they would demand real-time transparency be the norm. And our ambition 20 years ago wasn't just to pass a law, it was to create a norm and to create this assumption that, of course, government spending's online. Of course, we can search what government is doing. And so we need to, government always lags behind technology, so we need to move very quickly to upgrade our transparency laws today.
Yeah, I agree, because bottom line, if we don't know who is receiving taxpayer dollars and why, then there's no way for us to track that and hold recipients responsible for delivering what they've promised to our taxpayers. So I'm in complete agreement with that. My time is expiring, and I'll reserve the rest of my questions for another round. And with that, I will turn to Senator Hirono of Hawaii.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As we're focusing on waste, fraud, and abuse, there's just so much of that rampant in this regime that I hardly know where to begin. And while this is a small business committee and you want to focus on waste, fraud, and abuse in the small business segment, there is massive waste, fraud, and abuse going on in our government, and I only need to point out to things such as the destruction of the White House and a ballroom being paid for by individuals and corporations that seek to get support from this administration. If that isn't pay to play, I don't know what is. You have the border czar accepting $50,000 in what looks like bribes to him lending contracts to people that he has a relationship or even ownership interest in. Talk about ethical problems. There's all that. And meanwhile, this regime has gotten rid of all of the entities, the independent entities such as the IGs, who might be able to point out to us overseers that this kind of waste, fraud, and abuse is going on. I am also aware that the chair has sent letters to almost 24 agencies and departments asking for, asking for a pause on the 8A program. I don't even know if these agencies or departments have the authority to do such a pause, because we're talking about contracts and who knows, I don't even know what that means to pause, but to know that the 8A program consists of entity-owned businesses, which mainly are Alaska Native corporations, Native Hawaiian organizations, tribal organizations. These are entities that have to give back to the communities and who can access contracts, large contracts, up to $100 million. And the 8A also includes individual-owned businesses, and they have to show that they are economically and socially disadvantaged. So mainly when, Madam Chair, when you write a letter saying you want to pause on the 8A program, you are basically focusing your attention on the Native-owned businesses who hire thousands of people, giving back to the communities, alleging massive fraud, I would like to see that. If there is fraud going on in the 8A program, as if there is fraud in any other program, we should go after these people. You don't go in there and say, wipe out the entire program. So I'd say that is definitely overkill. And I want to record my serious concern about what you are doing, Madam Chair. I have a question for Mr. Hedlett-Gaudette. So would you say that you have an awareness of the 8A program? Would you say that it is fraught with rampant fraud and abuse?
No. I would say that, as you just mentioned, with any program, in the federal government, especially ones that deal with money, there are going to be people who take advantage of the system, bad actors.
Yeah, and considering that the 8A program consists of maybe 41 billion or so in contracts versus, what is it, 755 billion?
That's right.
I should think that there might be concerns about waste, fraud, and abuse in all those entities getting the 755 billion in government contracts. And I am very aware of the need for contract reform within the Armed Services Committee, because I have sat on that committee for over 12 years, and the former chair of that committee has spent his entire time chairing that committee trying to figure out how to do contracting reform. So we know that there are issues relating to oversight of all of these, the amounts of federal dollars that go out. Now, this is a desire to help entities that would otherwise have a hard time getting a fair shake and getting a share of federal contracts. This committee is actually supposed to be supporting those efforts, not to support waste and fraud, of course not, but to enable entities that would otherwise have a difficult time getting their opportunity to provide services to our country. When I think of all of the obvious conflict of interest and pay-to-play activity that is going on, not to mention the president wanting $200 million from the Department of Defense, which he considers his law firm. He considers Pam Bondi his lawyer. He wants the DOD to go after all his enemies. Well, what is that but abuse? Why don't we pay attention to those things? Okay.
You have 2 seconds. Senator.
I have run out of time, but you.
Yes, thank you. And I just, because the member has brought into question my motives, I did say pause on the 8A program. I did not say cancel the 8A program because of the recent abuse that has been brought to light through various investigative pieces of journalism. You are out of order, Senator Hirono. Thank you. So because of the abuse that has existed in the system, and I think most Americans, and especially our small businesses, would want us to open the books and provide transparency. So that's what we are asking, is a complete audit. Those that are fearing audits perhaps shouldn't be participating in federal government programs. I began my political career as an auditor. I believe in transparency and oversight. So next we will recognize Senator Husted of Ohio.
Thank you, Chair Ernst, and I appreciate what you're doing by raising this issue and giving us an opportunity to talk about it today. I'm just blown away by the idea that the people think that given the events, the recent events, that fraud is not an issue. The COVID fraud in the system was outrageous, including unemployment compensation. We're dealing with an issue in Minnesota right now where perhaps as much as $1 billion was stolen and money diverted away from what was supposed to be a food program for poor kids into the hands of criminals. And I was just on the Senate floor talking about the Affordable Care Act premium subsidies, which we know have been ripped off between, well, $21 and $27 billion, according to different reports, including one from the GAO. And this is a huge issue because people lose trust in government when they think their programs don't work. And I'm going to ask you each to answer a yes or no question because I'm interested in your take, because I'll tell you a quick story. I was with a road contractor that does aggregates, asphalts, and things like that. And I asked him about which he's not part of any set-aside program. I said, what do you think about these set-aside programs? He says, I don't. He said, they don't really bother me because everybody who has a set-aside just brings their trucks here, fills them up with my stuff, my aggregates, marks up the price, and then delivers it to the same place that I would. So I'm going to ask a question. Is that illegal?
Do you want one word?
One word.
Yes.
Legal. Mr.
No.
Gaudet? No.
Yes.
Based on our work, I actually don't know the answer, but I'd be happy to connect you with our experts on that.
So the answer I received back when I asked questions about it is that it was not illegal. It's offensive. It's not how these programs were redesigned, and it's a ripoff to the taxpayers. I think we could all agree with that, though. And it may not be illegal, but I hope, Chair, we work on this, that we make that kind of stuff illegal. Because it's not, in my opinion, what the programs are supposed to be about. And I know finding the fraudsters in the act is a hard thing to do, and so, but we have new technologies at our disposal, things like AI tools. And so I'm interested, I'll start with you, Dr. Is it LaFontaine? Yeah. What tools could, tech tools like AI, is it possible that we could do a better job with this, with tools like that?
So let me share a couple of things that we've learned from looking at the role of data analytics and similar tools in fraud detection and prevention. We have definitely learned that leveraging big amounts of information and big data across multiple programs is really important for helping agencies detect and prevent fraud. We have also learned that leveraging external data, so an agency needs to look outside of itself and find other ways to validate information that it's receiving. That's another important way for agencies to detect fraud. So we do have some work looking at how AI can be used for this purpose and in other purposes, and we'd be happy to share the findings of that when we're completed our work.
Okay, Mr. Hart, do you have thoughts on that, or what other tools should we use? Because we have this fraud. I mean, a lot of it apparently is in the misdesign of these programs.
Right.
That while they may be well intended and noble in their pursuit, the practical application is that the fraudsters always seem to outwit government,
Right.
and misuse these programs, and don't use them for the purposes that they were intended.
Well, thank you for that. I'll try to be very brief, but I have some experience in this. So between stints, when I worked in the Senate, now to open the books, I was a consultant and worked quite a bit with Silicon Valley companies, people who've designed these technologies. So I'm excited about the technology for a couple of reasons. What AI can do is pattern recognition and pattern prediction. So I was just in London recently, and there are live facial recognition vans everywhere. So I found that very dystopian rather than reassuring. But what inspired me to think about is, can we do live spending recognition? In other words, what we need to be doing, and what our organization is actually doing, is using our data set. We have the biggest data set of government spending ever assembled. To do AI, you need three things. You need big data, you need an algorithm, and processing power. So we're actively working on building tools that can do pattern recognition and then pattern prediction. So in a year or 5 years from now, we can run circles around CBO and provide those tools to individual taxpayers and make sure that that authority and that technology belongs with we the people. That is achievable, and that's what we're working on at Open the Books.
Great. Thank you for your time.
Now recognize Senator Markey.
Yep. Thank you, Madam Chair. And before I begin my questions, I want to take note of who is here serving as an expert on supposed fraud in the 8A program. I'll let his words behind me speak for themselves as to why he is unqualified to speak on this program. Even Elon Musk suspended him from Twitter for his extreme views. Mr. Rosiak's history shows he starts with a point of view, one which I find abhorrent, then spreads misinformation and conspiracy theories to support his views, and that is not journalism. For the past almost 50 years, the 8A Business Development Program has broken down historical barriers that underserved small business owners face when trying to contract with the federal government. Decades of research backed by real stories of discrimination and statistical analysis show that historical discrimination has created an unequal playing field in government contracting. It also shows that discrimination continues to this day, working against minority contractors. Yet programs like 8A are under an all-out attack from opponents within the government and outside the government who claim the programs are ripe with fraud. While it is important to root out instances of genuine fraud, these opponents aim to tear down programs that address historical discrimination. Mr. Hetler-Gaudet, how do programs like 8A program and other small business contracting programs help competition, help to ensure that in the federal contracting space, that there is room that is made for access for the groups that historically had been left out?
Thank you for the question, Senator. Small businesses are, as everyone on this committee, I think, would agree, the backbone of the American economy. However, they are not the backbone of the federal contracting system, and that is because there are a handful of extraordinarily large, extraordinarily well-connected and powerful corporations who vacuum up the vast majority of federal contracting dollars. This is particularly true in the defense industry space, but it's true everywhere also. So SBA programs and, generally speaking, small business set-asides are critical to trying to unlock the sort of stranglehold that small cadre of very large companies has on federal contracting dollars. And when you expand and diversify and broaden the industrial base, you make it healthier and more resilient. And then when you have an eye toward broadening and diversifying even within the small business contracting space and trying to make sure that the playing field is level for those who might want to be in that space, you do an even better job of increasing the health and the resiliency of the industrial base.
Yeah, so Mr. Hetler-Gaudet, do you believe small disadvantaged businesses contracting programs make up the most fraud or waste in the federal government? Do you believe they make up the most within just the federal contracting space?
That's a categorical no. No, it's not even close.
Do you believe the Trump administration's actions towards 8A program are efficient or effective oversight?
I do not. I think if they cared deeply about looking into 8A or any other program, they would have an inspector general do it, because that's who should be doing it. I also think it's a little bit too convenient that the program they're targeting happens to fall into a category of a sort of ideological or political viewpoint that they disagree with.
Yeah, and they fired the best inspector general in America in January, who oversaw the SBA. They just fired him. In June, SBA announced the so-called audit of the 8A program, and this month, SBA ordered all 8A firms to submit extensive documentation within 30 days over the holidays as a part of their investigation. Oversight is important to make sure that government programs are working properly, but I'm concerned that the SBA's investigation is politically motivated. Dr. LaFountain, the GAO, provides the standards for government audits through what's known as the Yellow Book. Can you tell us how audits are done and how your office typically conducts them?
So thank you for the question. I love to talk about the Yellow Book. The Yellow Book is our nickname for the Generally Accepted Government Auditing Standards, or GAGAS. And this is a framework for conducting high-quality audits with competence, integrity, objectivity, and independence. The Yellow Book is a big book, and it covers a lot of territory. It explains the purpose of government auditing, which is to provide objective analysis and information needed to improve government performance and accountability. It includes standards for conducting audits ethically, independently, and with sound professional judgment, and other matters related to making sure we do our work in a manner that's transparent, independent, and accountable throughout our auditing process.
Yeah, thank you. So as I spoke about in my opening statement, it is ironic that we're here today to talk about waste, fraud, and abuse and are ignoring the elephant in the room. President Trump's supercharged pay-to-play system designed to benefit his billionaire buddies and hurt small businesses. Mr. Hetler-Gaudette, as an expert in oversight, could you explain how President Trump is using the federal contracting system to reward donors and political supporters?
Sure. One specific, especially brazen example of this, and it's been mentioned a couple of times, but I think it's worth underscoring because of how conscience shocking it should be to everybody, is the East Wing Ballroom project. Recently, a report came out from one of our colleague organizations, Public Citizen, that scanned all of the corporations and individuals who were donating to that vanity project, and it turned out that a large number of them were big prime contractors who, on average or in aggregate, held about $280 billion worth of federal contracts. So I think there's a bit of a, clear wink, nod, pay to play, at the very least, the appearance of such a relationship there.
Yeah, and what effect do you see that pay-to-play system having on small businesses?
I think the more the already well-connected and the already powerful companies who receive contract, the more they receive, the more you crowd out and close off opportunities for smaller businesses.
And how does corruption or fraud in the 8A program compare to what the administration is doing with its big business contracting and backroom deals?
I think in terms of scale and scope, it doesn't really compare at all.
Yeah, like an elephant to a mouse, huh?
Thank you.
So, yeah, so we thank you for your great work on this, and I think you've helped to clarify what is going on here today and how we still haven't had a hearing in any one of the Republican-controlled committees on what the Trump administration is doing to instill waste, fraud, and corruption into the heart of the federal government. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And Mr. Rosiak, because your name was brought up, if you would like to respond, you may respond.
I can't see it, but if I could have a copy of that poster framed, if possible, that would be amazing. You mentioned the prospect of a president giving contracts to his friends. I think that's of concern to all of us. The mechanism to do it is one we have safeguards against. But let's say, purely hypothetically speaking, President Trump wanted to steer a contract to SpaceX or to somebody who donated a bunch of money to him. He can't do that under the competitive bidding process. He needs a mechanism to do it. So what could happen is you have a low-level SpaceX employee have his wife create a women-owned small 8A firm, and they get the sole source contract, and then they sub it out, of course, to the people that they work with closely. And it's easy for the government to do with a wink and nod or just read between the lines that this is going to wind up with SpaceX. So that's the concern here, is that procurement is like water. It follows the path of least resistance. And when you have a loophole like this, it creates all those things that nobody supports. So the other thing is, it's not that, there's a couple reasons that 8A is in the spotlight now, but one of it is the Supreme Court. Okay, so Students for Fair Admissions, the big Supreme Court dealing with race, that showed that this program is illegal. There's a court case called Ultima that has subjected 8A to an injunction right now. So we can't have a hearing about 8A and talk about, oh, Trump is against DEI, whatever, without recognizing it's literally under injunction right now. So this committee is going to have to go back and revisit the legislation, and the SBA is going to have to, as the terms of a legal settlement or a final court order, to do a rulemaking process. But right now, the government cannot treat people differently based on race. So if you have a minority set-aside program, without the minority, you're left with just a random set-aside program, which is just rife for all sorts of exploitation.
Thank you.
Madam Chair?
I appreciate
Madam Chair?
I'm on my 5 minutes of
Well,
questioning.
you gave him more time
This is
to
part of
answer
this is
than-
part of my questioning.
Oh, what, you mean I get recognized again?
You'll get recognized again, Ranking Member Markey. Thank you. So I just want to get this straight. So we were talking in Ranking Member Markey's line of questioning. He said, the largest amount of fraud, waste, abuse is not in the Small Business Administration and its programs. I might be paraphrasing a little bit. This is, however, the Small Business Committee, and that's what we are focusing on today. So, Mr. Hetler-Gaudette, you said that no, that doesn't happen the most in the 8A programs. However, I did annotate or go through quite a few billions of dollars of fraud or waste that happened within the 8A programs, the PPP, the EIDL loan programs. So, you are not saying to this committee that we should not go after people committing fraud in these small business programs of which the Small Business Committee has jurisdiction. Am I correct?
Yes, absolutely. You should go after fraud and waste wherever it exists. I think the point I was making was more about sort of prioritization of resources in doing so.
No, thank you for that clarification. And I would state as well, I have focused on fraud, waste, and abuse for the past 11 years of my Senate career, regardless of what agency or what president was at the helm. So I think it's fair to say that we fight for American taxpayers regardless of whether we have an R, a D, or an I behind our name. And that's the purpose of today's committee, is that we're focusing on fraud that has occurred within these programs. So a question for the entire panel, just very quickly. Just last week in my home state of Iowa, just to show I don't pick on everybody without recognizing issues in my own home state, there was a former Cuban military sergeant who came to the U.S. illegally after crossing the southern border and was sentenced to 4 years in federal prison for his role in orchestrating a pandemic benefits fraud conspiracy involving $2.4 million in fraudulently obtained PPP loans. An illegal Cuban militant in Iowa applied for and got $2.4 million in PPP loans. Meanwhile, many of our Iowans were struggling to keep their lights on during the COVID pandemic. So because I only have 20 seconds left, we have a lot of egregious examples, but wouldn't you agree this is someone that should have been prosecuted, Mr. Rosiak?
Yes.
Mr. Hetler-Gaudet?
Yes.
Mr. Hart?
Yes.
Ms. Fontaine? LaFontaine?
Based on our work, yes, it should be investigated.
Thank you. And I'll recognize Ranking Member Markey for a second round.
No, thank you. And again, I wasn't going to put it in the record, but I will. You know, one of Mr. Rosiak's tweets just says, "Turns out lots of DEI hires are both dumber and vastly more immoral than their competent predecessors." And I don't think that the evidence would actually bear that out. I just think that basically continues to reflect a pre-existing bias. So, Mr. Hart, in your testimony, you call for transparency surrounding contracting. A recent study found that donors to the President's Ballroom project have received $279 billion in federal contracts over the last 5 years. Mr. Hart, do you think those donors to the ballroom should have to disclose their names?
Well, Mr. Markey, what I believe is that in our Constitution, the founders described transparency not as a two-way street, but a one-way street. In other words, as taxpayers, we have the right to inspect the government's checkbook. However, the government does not have the right to inspect our checkbook. I think that's the constitutional standard of transparency, and when we conflate those two, we actually dilute the meaning of transparency in the Constitution. I'm an equal opportunity oversight person. I think we should look at the spending of everything. But if we expand the aperture of the hearing to look at ballroom spending, we should also look at healthcare fraud. And the Pete Peterson Foundation found that there's $925 billion in healthcare fraud. So the other title of the hearing could be the opportunity cost of fraud for small business, which is extreme all over the federal government, particularly in the healthcare sector.
No, thank you. And this year, I have sent a number of letters to the SBA asking about DOGE's activities. And I requested a meeting with DOGE in February. That has yet to occur, and I've asked for that meeting with DOGE and the SBA, led by the chair, over and over and over again. We haven't had it. DOGE is in like a witness protection program. You know, they're someplace. We know they're someplace. They're inside of SBA. And by the way, the same thing is true over the Environment Committee. No hearings. Over at Labor, no hearings, no hearings, no hearings. They're inside, you know, but we don't have any hearings on it. And we know there's a lot of waste and fraud and abuse corruption going on, we just aren't going to have any hearings on it. And I think we're going to finish the whole term without ever having had a hearing on Doge inside of these federal agencies. And that's a crime in and of itself, that we're not going to look at that. It's hiding in plain sight right in front of us, Doge inside of these agencies. What kind of self-serving activities are they engaging in? Who are they helping by the decisions which they are making? What's going on? Well, we're the Committee of Jurisdiction, and we haven't had a hearing yet. We haven't had a joint investigation yet. We have done nothing, to find out what is going on. So what little we do know about Doge's dealings at SBA is coming from the media rather than SBA's responses to my congressional requests. I've made this request over and over and over again. And in rare cases where I've received a response, there is no helpful information, which we get. They write their answer essentially in invisible ink. They don't provide the information which the public, Mr. Hart, is entitled to, the transparency. It's a one-way street. It's coming out of the federal government to the American people. Then they can judge what's going on. They're not going to provide that information. And it's my understanding that GAO also has had some trouble getting Administrator Loeffler and her team to respond to requests for information that is necessary for your work. And I'm very glad to hear that GAO is conducting a government-wide review of the administration's efforts to implement the president's executive orders, including how Doge has been used to access data and make policy decisions without any transparency. Who are they helping? What businesses are they helping? What friends of the president are they helping? We don't know. And it's not just SBA, it's every agency. It's the entire federal government. So, Dr. LaFountain, is GAO looking to see how Doge complied with privacy and information law?
Yes, we have a body of work, at least 8 engagements ongoing on issues related to Doge, and we do have 1 engagement on Doge and data protections that is looking at compliance with privacy and information law.
Okay, so again, I reiterate to you, Madam Chair, I request that this committee hold a hearing on GAO's findings about Doge, specifically about their compliance with data and information security laws. This would be especially helpful since we never heard from Doge despite our efforts to get them to brief our committee. And I make that, again, as a special request to you. I think the American public is waiting for the answers to the questions they are asking about what's going on inside of the SBA.
Yes, and thank you. And Doge does happen to be the Democrats' favorite boogeyman out there. And I do want to be clear that under this administration, we're finally reining in government spending and rooting out waste, fraud, and abuse. So during the pandemic and under the Biden administration, SBA loans were given out like candy. Let's not forget that individuals who used Barbie dolls as their photo identification were approved for SBA loans. This is totally unacceptable. In March, it was announced that due to Doge's hard work in this area, they have uncovered more than 5,000 SBA loans equivalent to millions of dollars where the listed borrower was 11 years old or younger. Again, Doge is the Democrats' favorite boogeyman. If updating outdated systems and saving taxpayers' time and money scares them, that says more about their priorities than ours. Are my Democratic colleagues saying that we should be ignoring billions of dollars of waste, fraud, and abuse because we're focusing only on SBA today and not the entire federal government? The Biden administration tried to sweep this problem under the rug. We aren't doing that. In fact, we're going to do everything we can to stop it from happening again and recollect every penny that was stolen or misspent. As chair of the Senate Doge Caucus, I agree with the aim of Doge, which is to ensure that taxpayer dollars are being used effectively and that waste, fraud, and abuse in the federal government is rooted out. And this demonstrates why, to truly create change within the federal government, DOGE has been given access to many federal agencies and department systems, which has allowed them to cut through long-standing hurdles to find waste within each government entity. And all Americans should know that DOGE employees are federal employees. They are federal employees, subject to the same background checks, privacy laws, and restrictions regarding data sharing as any other federal employee. So if we want to discuss hypotheticals and leaked data, whatever might be out there, let's talk about real leaks and failures, starting with how a former IRS contractor leaked the private data of more than 400,000 taxpayers, including President Trump's. Additionally, I've heard my colleagues question if DOGE has saved money, and the answer is a resounding yes, and it's transparently listed on their website. DOGE is working to generate real savings and estimates that it has saved about $214 billion so far. DOGE is saving Americans money at across the federal bureaucracy. The Department of Veterans Affairs was paying $56,000 to water 8 plants. Yes, 8 household plants for 5 years. $56,000. I would have loved to have had that contract. Thanks to DOGE, this contract was canceled, and those plants will be watered for free. So while DOGE keeps delivering more savings every day, Democrats are more upset by the effort to stop wasteful spending than by the misuse of Americans' taxpayer dollars. As I've always said, if you can't find waste in Washington, D.C., there can only be one reason. You are not looking. Shouldn't we be pulling the plug on government waste instead of those who are finding it? I have 1 minute left, and I will go, Mr. Hart, talking about waste. I gave the egregious example of a Cuban illegal migrant militant who scammed the federal government for $2.4 million. Can you provide any other egregious examples of where there has been scams in the federal government?
Well, Senator, unfortunately I can. I think one example we haven't touched on is that in Atlanta, there was a mail carrier who stole Paycheck Protection Program checks from people's mailboxes along his routes and used it to provide personal clothing, personal expenses for himself. And we have to ask, why did that happen? And I believe it happens because when government gets in the business of deciding it can pick winners and losers, what it ends up doing is punishing the winners and rewarding the losers. And maybe instead of having a federal small business administration, we should return business to business and business to the states.
Wow.
And let them navigate the questions of the economics of it.
Okay, and that is pretty profound. So thank you for that. I would also like to make sure the ranking member is aware that on October 30th, I requested the SBA Inspector General to do an audit of the 8A program. So I ask unanimous consent that my letter be entered into the record, and without objection, so ordered. You want another round,
Yes, please.
ranking member? Yes, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Yeah, I would love to see. I would love to see the DOGE representative from SBA sitting here at a witness table under oath. Love to see who that is. I think you and I right now would have about a 50% chance of picking that person out of a 2-person lineup. We have no idea who it is. We have no idea who what their name is. We don't even know who they are. And we're supposed to take their word for it? We don't even know their name. How in the world can we give any respect to people who are too afraid to have us know their names, too afraid to appear before this committee? You know, they beg to be put in a witness protection program so that they can hide out, from any scrutiny from the public. And yet we're supposed to respect the numbers which they've given us? We don't even respect them. We don't even know who they are. This is like anonymity that This is like Soviet Russia. This is like the deepest, darkest, Kafkaesque kind of a proceeding that we're operating on. We don't have any information to give any kind of respect to any number which they give. Although I do know one thing, that the biggest part of the COVID fraud occurred in 2020 when Trump was president. Although we're not going to hear that from, is that not correct from the GAO? Is that not an early conclusion that you've reached?
So we did find that PPP and COVID EIDL were both more vulnerable to fraud early in the program, but I checked with our experts and we don't have estimates that kind of break it down from one year to the next.
No, I got it. Yeah, very vulnerable to fraud during the Trump administration. But we're not going to have a hearing on that, that's for sure. That's not going to happen either. We're putting Trump into a witness protection program as well. And anyone who represents him and who would have had a responsibility for any of that. But we're not beyond like taking black and brown citizens who have small businesses and somehow or other being able to smear them when the vast amount of all of the fraud, the elephant, still isn't willing to come in here and to sit down. So, maybe we could let them come in like they're ICE agents and just put bags over their head, Maybe they could wear masks so we wouldn't identify them, Maybe we could just have them sit out there and maybe mumble through their masks what they found. But we could at least cross-examine them, we could at least hold them to an oath. But if they're afraid to be recognized the way ICE agents are, maybe, and that's kind of a characteristic of the Trump administration. People want to put on their mask almost like they are, in fact, engaging in criminal behavior. They are engaging in behavior which is unconstitutional, abhorrent to the rule of law in our nation, abhorrent to the due process protections, which all of these people who are in all of these programs are entitled to. So that's pretty much my, take on this. Unless and until we have these people in here and testifying, we don't owe them any honest respect at all. Any numbers, any representations, which they are making. And it is the GAO, it is the Inspector Generals who have to conduct the proper independent oversight of federal programs. And unfortunately, this is not a hearing focused upon finding bipartisan solutions to problems that are out there. That's what I would like to do, rather than turning this into a star chamber, into a Kafkaesque trial, where it's impossible for us to actually get to the accusers who are inside of DOGE and sending out information, but without any ability to cross-examine them. So we should be having real oversight hearings, Madam Chair. We should be calling on the administration to make sure that SBA programs are running the way they are supposed to. We should be collaborating with the SBA Inspector General, with the GAO, so that we can get to the bottom of what's going on right now. Congressional oversight is critical. It's absolutely essential. And we can't do it if we don't have the facts. We can't do it if we can't get the information. Otherwise, it just turns into political targeting of programs and individuals who have invoked the political ire of particular segments of the Trump empire. And that's just not real oversight. And as members of this committee, we should do everything we can to uplift small businesses. That's not what this hearing is all about. It's stigmatizing those who are already most vulnerable historically in terms of their ability. So again, we're ignoring the elephant in the room, and we know it's the Trump administration officials who are inside all of these agencies. Until we get to that GOP elephant, we're not having real hearings. We're not doing real oversight. We're just allowing for the demonization of those who have always historically been most vulnerable. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And with that, we will go ahead and wrap the committee. I will take a little bit of issue in describing the United States of America as Soviet Russia. Those of us that served in uniform for this great nation feel otherwise. I just wanted to make that very clear, that I'm proud of my country regardless of who is at the helm, because our country is made of incredible men and women from all walks of life. So if there are no further questions, I want to thank our witnesses for being with us today. I ask unanimous consent that the record of today's hearing remain open for 2 weeks for members to submit questions, revise and extend their remarks, and submit additional information into the record. And without objection, so ordered. With that, the Committee on Small Business and Entrepreneurship stands adjourned.